There are places that do not sleep, even when every window is dark and every door is shut. Their walls seem to hold on to breath that should have faded long ago. Their floors creak in empty rooms where no one walks anymore. One such place stands alone at the end of a long, forgotten road in the American South. To strangers, it is just an old mansion, paint peeling, glass clouded, framed by trees that have outgrown the land that once fed them. But to those who know where to look, this house is not just a ruin. It is a record. Every beam, every brick, every passage tells the story of a man who was never meant to be remembered. His name was Josiah. He was born into bondage on a vast plantation called Redwater Estate, a place built on cotton and cruelty. His first memories were not of toys or lullabies, but of shouting, dust, and the steady ache of hunger. His mother, Liza, worked in the fields from dawn until the sky bruised purple. At night, she would hold him close on a rough pallet in a cabin packed with other bodies, and whisper stories of a land she had never seen but carried in her heart. A land where no one could be bought or sold. She never called it by name. She only called it, away. Josiah never knew his father. People said it was the master, Elias Huntley, who passed him in the yard one afternoon when Josiah was small and stared a little too long at the boy's face. But no acknowledgement followed, no softening of treatment. Josiah was property like everyone else. What set him apart was not blood. It was how he saw the world. From the time he could stand, Josiah watched things. He watched the way the sun moved across the roof of the overseer's house, how the shadows changed shape and size as the hours passed. He traced knots in wood with his finger until he could predict where the grain would twist. He stared at fences, barns, sheds, trying to understand why some stayed standing through every storm while others leaned and cracked and fell. In a place where curiosity could be dangerous, he kept his questions quiet. But his mind was never still. At 8 years old, he was put to work carrying water to the men in the fields. The buckets were almost as big as he was. He staggered under their weight, but he still noticed things. How the rows of cotton were laid out in perfect lines, how the crib that stored tools had a floorboard that squeaked just a little louder than the rest, how the main house stood apart on a small rise, facing the river like a judge overseeing everything below. The master called it his pride. Josiah called it unreachable. One summer, a storm rolled in with such fury that the old smokehouse collapsed in the night. The following morning, the master's temper roared louder than the thunder had. He ordered a rebuild. The usual carpenters were busy repairing the main house roof, so the overseer grabbed a handful of boys, including Josiah, and dragged them to the site. The work was crude. Posts were hammered into the dirt, boards nailed without planning. As the others followed directions blindly, Josiah stood back. He looked at the fallen structure, then at the half-hearted repairs being made. "It'll fall again," he muttered under his breath. The overseer heard him and whirled around, whip in hand. "What was that, boy?" Josiah froze. Every instinct told him to stay silent. But the words were already out, and something inside him refused to swallow them back. "The corner posts," he said quietly. "They're crooked. The weight's wrong. Next big storm, it'll come down." The overseer sneered, ready to strike, when a calm voice spoke from behind them. "Let him show you." The voice belonged to a visitor that day, a man named Carter, an architect from Savannah hired to consult on expanding the main house. He had been watching. Curious, he stepped closer to the ruined smokehouse and the half-rebuilt frame, eyes flicking from the wood to the boy. "Go on," Carter said. "If you know so much. Show us how not to waste the master's money a second time." Josiah moved slowly, waiting for the whip to crack. When it didn't, he forced himself to focus. He approached the frame and pressed his hand against one of the posts. It shifted slightly under his touch. "Too shallow," he said. "And it leans. Should be deeper in the ground." And that beam up there, he pointed, it's resting on soft wood. It's already splitting. Carter inspected the places Josiah indicated. The boy was right. The man's brows furrowed, but not in anger. In calculation. What's your name? He asked. Josiah. Can you use a saw? Yes. Then you'll work with me now. The overseer tried to protest, but the master's visitor outranked him in this matter. And so, at 8 years old, Josiah was pulled from the fields and dragged into a world he had only glimpsed from afar, a world of drawn lines, rulers, and measured angles. A world of plans. In the cramped office outbuilding where Carter kept his tools and scrolls, Josiah learned to read without letters. He learned the language of structure. Carter never intended to teach him, not formally. But he let the boy watch as he sketched additions for the master's house, new wings, taller columns, a grand staircase that curved like river water. When Carter dropped a scrap of paper, Josiah snatched it up, smoothing it carefully. At night, long after he was sent back to the slave quarters, he would trace those lines in the dirt outside his cabin, committing them to memory. He noticed how every line on the paper became something in the real world. A rectangle might become a door. A series of stacked shapes turned into floors above floors. A simple mark showed a window, not only where it would be, but how it would open, how it would catch light, how it would frame what lay beyond. Josiah began to imagine his own lines. Small at first, a doorway a bit wider, a wall a little thicker. Then stranger ideas, hollows inside walls, spaces behind shelves, stairs that ended at a blank wall but actually turned sharply behind it into darkness. He did not know it yet, but he was beginning to design escape, one invisible stroke at a time. When he was 15, Carter took ill. Fever burned the architect for days. The master grew impatient. The expansion of the main house had to continue. He could not wait for another architect to travel from the city. So one morning, Elias Huntley called for Josiah. They met in the front parlor, a room Josiah had cleaned but never entered as anything more than a shadow. Now he stood on the polished floor, facing portraits of pale-faced ancestors whose painted eyes seemed to follow him. Huntley sat in a carved chair, cane across his lap, a rolled set of plans laid out on the table beside him. "I hear you've been useful," the master said. "Carter says you know these drawings almost as well as he does." Josiah said nothing. Slaves did not speak unless asked a direct question. Huntley studied him, taking in the boy's steady gaze, the set of his shoulders, the quiet control in his posture. "Useful is good," the master said. "But clever can be dangerous." He rose and walked to the window, looking out at the land that spread beneath his ownership like a map he believed only he could read. "I want my house finished," Huntley continued. "I want it grand. I want it to impress every man who sets foot here. Carter is weak. You are not. You will oversee the work until he returns. You will do as the drawings say. No more, no less. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "Remember, boy," Huntley added, turning back toward him, "this house is mine. Every board you touch belongs to me. Every thought in that head belongs to me. You are simply the hands that move." For a moment, their eyes met. Josiah knew that if he looked even a fraction too long, he could be punished. He lowered his gaze. "Yes, sir," he repeated. From that day on, Josiah's life changed again. He became the bridge between paper and timber. He measured, cut, directed crews. Older men grumbled at taking orders from someone so young, and from a slave at that, but the overseer backed the master's will with the whip. Josiah's word on the construction site became law. If he said a beam was too weak, it was replaced. If he declared a wall misaligned, they took it down and started again. The house rose under his eye, brick by brick. He did exactly as the drawings commanded, on the surface. But beneath, he began to weave his own vision. Small decisions at first. A storage room in the basement with its back wall thicker than necessary. A column that ran not solid through its center, but hollow, its core left open during construction, then capped at each end with carved decorative pieces. No one noticed. Why would they? They saw only what the master had ordered: symmetry, grandeur, a testament to his wealth. Only Josiah saw the possibilities hidden in each deviation. As the years passed and the main house grew into a mansion that towered over the plantation, Josiah watched more than wood and stone. He watched people. He saw how overseers walked their patrols at night, which corners they cut, what paths they favored. He saw where their lanterns never quite reached the back of a corridor. He watched the master's guests as they arrived for parties, trailing perfume and laughter, blind to the quiet suffering that made their luxury possible. He watched the way the doors were locked at night, from the inside in some cases, from the outside in others. He learned routines. He learned timing. He learned all the patterns that those in power thought were invisible simply because they never imagined anyone like him would notice. The idea of escape did not come to Josiah suddenly. It formed slowly, like a shadow at the edge of his mind. He had heard stories, of course. Whispers in the quarters about men and women who slipped away in the dark, following the North Star. Some were said to have made it. Others were found and brought back in chains, punished in ways that made their names unspoken forever after. Josiah had never allowed himself to dream of running. There was too much risk. Too much to lose. His mother was still there. His younger sister, Eliza, named after their mother, depended on him to slip her extra food when he could, to shield her from attention when possible. But the more he built, the more he understood something that those who owned him did not: houses could be cages, yes. But they could also be mazes. And in a maze, power belonged to the one who knew the paths. The turning point came one winter, when the river flooded and a group of enslaved men from a neighboring plantation were brought to Redwater temporarily. Among them was an older man named Abram, his face lined deep, his eyes fierce despite the years. He had tried to escape 3 times. The scars on his back told the story of his failures, but the way he carried himself told another story entirely. They had never broken his will. At night, after the overseer's footsteps faded, Abram sat outside the cabins and spoke in a low voice, sharing his experiences with anyone brave enough to listen without being caught. He talked about routes north and west, about rivers that had to be crossed, about towns where a black face meant instant suspicion. He spoke of people who would help, free black families, sympathetic whites, secret groups that risked imprisonment to move runaways from safe house to safe house. The road out, Abram said one night, his gaze fixed on the distant silhouette of the mansion, is not straight. It's crooked. It doubles back. It hides. If you try to walk it like a soldier marching in a line, they'll find you in a day. But if you move like water, if you use what they build against them, you can slip through their fingers and they'll never know where you went. Josiah listened, every word etching into his mind. Use what they build against them. He thought of the hollow column. The thicker wall. The passages he could still alter in the new sections of the mansion, the spaces nobody else understood as fully as he did. He realized the house was not just a prison. It was a tool. And in his hands, it could become a weapon of subtle revolt. From then on, his choices became bolder. He designed a small door beneath the main staircase, disguised as paneling, leading into the space he had carved out early on. From that cramped corridor, he connected a narrow passage that ran along the back of the wall, leading to a gap beneath the dining room floor. From there, another square opening into the base of the pantry wall. If a person timed it right, slipping into the first door when the hall was clear, they could move unseen from the front of the house to the rear, then down to the root cellar, where another small gap opened into the foundations. He built vents that aligned perfectly with exterior cracks, allowing air through but blocking sight. He crafted steps inside the thickest walls, where a man could climb on hands and knees from one level of the house to another. Each new layer of construction gave him another chance to add to the network. No one questioned him when he requested extra lumber or slightly wider framing in certain areas. The overseer had no eye for plans. The master, busy with business in town, saw only progress toward his dream home. Liza, Josiah's mother, fell ill around that time. Years of work and deprivation had worn her down. As her breath grew weaker, she pulled Josiah close. "You were always lookin' past things," she whispered. "Past the walls. Past the sky. I used to worry they'd beat it out of you. But you kept it quiet. That's how you live. Whatever you're building out there," she coughed, struggling. "Make sure it leads somewhere they can't reach." When she died, they buried her in an unmarked grave on the edge of the fields, beneath a tree whose roots had long since tangled with the bones of others. That night, Josiah stood alone underneath the new mansion, in the lowest part of the foundation, and traced the lines of his hidden network with his fingertips against the cold stone. "I will," he said softly. "I promise." Years later, work on the mansion finally ended. 5 long years of cutting, lifting, hammering, hauling. In that time, Josiah's shoulders broadened, his hands turned to leather, and his mind sharpened like a blade. He knew every inch of the estate by then, the depth of the wells, the thickness of the cellar walls, the angle at which the roof met the sky. The master grew richer. Slaves were bought and sold like livestock. The house became the jewel of the region, talked about in neighboring counties. But behind the plaster and paint, the secret passages remained. The night they celebrated the mansion's completion, music filled its halls for the first time. Candles glowed in tall silver holders. Women in silk dresses laughed on the balconies. Men smoked and boasted in the study. Josiah moved among them, invisible in his plain clothes, setting things right after drunken hands knocked them aside, making sure nothing that mattered was disturbed. No one thanked him. No one even met his eye. He did not care. He was not moving for them. In his mind, he walked the hidden paths again and again, seeing them as clearly as if the walls were made of glass. He knew that if he ever tried to leave, he would get one chance. One night. One thin sliver of time when routines broke just enough for him to vanish into the maze he had created and slip out the other side. That night came sooner than he expected. In the early spring, a barn close to the far field caught fire. Some said it was lightning. Others quietly believed someone had dropped a lantern on purpose. Regardless, chaos erupted. Men ran with buckets, shouting. The overseer sprinted toward the blaze, whip forgotten. Even the master rushed out, screaming about property and loss. In the mansion, servants scrambled to secure valuables in case the fire spread. In that confusion, patterns shattered. Doors that were usually locked remained unguarded. Corridors stood briefly empty. Josiah was in the rear hall when the alarm bells began. He looked toward the blazing horizon, then toward the front doors, then back at the staircase. He thought of his sister Eliza, still in the quarters. He thought of his mother's grave. He thought of Abram's words, spoken under his breath months earlier before he was marched away. "If you see the water break, boy, you gotta move. Don't wait for it to flood your feet." His heart hammered. Fear clawed at his chest. If he ran now, he might die. If he stayed, he might never get another chance. He walked, not ran, to the panel beneath the staircase. His fingers found the nearly invisible seam with the ease of long practice. He slipped inside and closed it behind him. The darkness was complete, but in his mind the layout glowed like a map. On hands and knees, he crawled along the narrow corridor, feeling for each turn, counting the spaces between support beams with his palms. Above, muffled feet thundered back and forth. Voices shouted. A woman screamed as something crashed. None of it touched him here. The house, which had always been his taskmaster, now became his accomplice. He reached the gap beneath the dining room, then pushed through into the tight space behind the pantry wall. Through a small vent, he heard the cook's panicked prayers as she rushed to save what she could. He waited until her footsteps faded, then slid along the inside of the wall toward the back of the mansion. The air grew cooler. The sounds of the fire and chaos outside dimmed as stone wrapped around him. At the base of the foundation, he found the last opening, just as he had designed it years before, a narrow, man-sized exit that led into the old drainage channel beneath the property. It had once carried runoff out toward the creek. Over time, sediment had filled much of it, but Josiah had quietly dug where he could, pretending to clear debris when ordered to clean the grounds. He squeezed through, the rough stone scraping his back, and emerged into the damp belly of the land. He crawled forward until the whisper of moving water tickled his ears. The creek. Freedom's first breath. He paused and looked back, though he could see nothing. Only earth and darkness. Behind him, somewhere above, the mansion stood, its fine rooms filled with panic and smoke, its master screaming orders, unaware that the man who had given him his greatest symbol of status had just disappeared into its bones and out the other side. Josiah moved on. What happened next, history does not record in clear, straight lines. There are fragments. Rumors. A mention in a freedman's newspaper of a skilled black builder assisting in the construction of safe houses along a known escape route. A ledger entry from an abolitionist sympathizer paying a quiet craftsman for reinforcing a hidden room where runaways could wait until nightfall. A passing comment in the journal of a preacher who helped operate a station on the Underground Railroad. He spoke little, but his eyes saw the structure of every place he entered. Said he once built a house he hoped he'd never live in long. Wouldn't tell me its name. That preacher never recorded the builder's full identity. He only described him as lean, with strong hands and a way of tapping the walls before he slept, as if listening for secrets. Back at Redwater Estate, the shock of Josiah's disappearance turned quickly to fury. The master ordered searches of every building, every outbuilding, every inch of land. Hounds were brought in. They picked up a scent in the mansion but lost it somewhere near the back foundations. The overseer tore through storerooms, ripping down shelves, demanding someone explain how a man could simply vanish from a sealed house. No one could. They brought other carpenters to inspect the mansion, hoping to find some flaw that might indicate how Josiah had escaped. None of them saw the network, not completely. They found oddities, yes. A hollow sound when certain walls were knocked upon. A gap behind a panel that seemed too deep. But nothing they could understand as a full system. Some recommended bricking up certain spaces, just to be sure. The master agreed. Portions of Josiah's maze were sealed in haste, layer upon layer of stone laid over his original design. Even so, not everything could be undone. Deep in the house, in spaces no one remembered, his work remained intact. In the years that followed, legends grew. Some said Josiah died weeks after his escape, shot by patrols or swallowed by a river crossing. Others insisted he survived, that he guided groups through the wilderness and into new lives in places where no one knew their chains. Children on nearby farms whispered that if you got close enough to Redwater's main house at night, you could hear someone moving inside the walls, breathing slow and steady, footsteps crossing rooms no longer accessible. The idea took root that Josiah never fully left. That some part of him remained bound to the mansion he had built, not as a prisoner, but as its true master. Time, cruel as it is, washed away many details. The plantation system collapsed. The Civil War came like a fire far greater than the one that had once lit up Redwater's fields. The Huntley family line thinned. Wealth melted under debt and defeat. The mansion passed from hand to hand, each new owner trying to tame it and make it their own. None stayed very long. Some tried to renovate, only to find walls that led to nowhere, beams that could not be moved without destabilizing entire sections, and strange voids behind structural supports that no one could explain without demolishing large portions of the house. Most gave up. The mansion grew older, its paint flaking, its once pristine floors scuffed and creaking. But beneath the visible decay, its core remained as Josiah had built it. In the 20th century, a small group of local historians took interest in the property. One of them, a black researcher named Miriam, was determined to uncover the lives of the enslaved people who had long been overshadowed by the stories of their enslavers. She combed through courthouse records, bill of sale documents, plantation inventories. In one brittle ledger, half faded with age, she found a line that made her breath catch. Asset, 1 male, Josiah. Occupation, builder, draftsman. Exceptional value. Recommended protection. No last name. No biography. Just that. Yet it was more than most of his peers had received even in death. Miriam and her colleagues gained permission to examine the mansion. As they moved through its rooms, they noticed the irregularities others had dismissed. A wall thicker than necessary here. A staircase that seemed slightly off alignment there. In the basement, they found a bricked-over arch low to the ground. The mortar was a different color than the surrounding stone, newer by decades. They marked it in their notes. In an academic article published quietly in a regional journal, they proposed that the house had once contained hidden rooms or passages, possibly used to control enslaved people or, intriguingly, to conceal resistance. They cited similar instances in other historical buildings where architecture bore the evidence of exploitation or struggle. They didn't know the whole story. They couldn't have. But they understood enough to say one thing clearly: enslaved people were not just labor. They were craftsmen. Designers. Builders of the very structures that symbolized their oppression. And sometimes, within those structures, they carved out space for their own survival. As more research poured in from around the South, a pattern emerged. Accounts of black artisans whose names had been buried under their masters' signatures. Stories of enslaved carpenters who built not only barns and cabins but great houses, churches, even bridges. Many of their names survived in fragments, like Josiah's. Others were lost entirely. But the physical evidence remained in the nails they forged, the beams they set, the walls they raised. Modern visitors to the mansion at the end of that forgotten road often come for the eerie atmosphere. They leave with something else. Standing beneath the grand staircase, feeling the strange stillness in the air, hearing the way their own voice echoes back at them slightly delayed, they begin to understand that this is not just a haunted house story. It is a testimony. The floor holds the imprint of bare feet that were never meant to be honored. The railing bears the faint scratches of hands hardened by labor. In a dim corner, just where the edge of the morning light stops, some say they can still make out a small carving in the wood near the base of the rail. At first glance, it looks like nothing more than wear. But if you lean closer, the lines seem deliberate, forming two simple words. The walls remember. Whether Josiah carved them himself or someone later added them in his honor, no one can say. But the sentiment rings true. Buildings cannot speak as humans do, yet they record. They hold the weight of what happened inside them. The man who built this mansion understood that better than anyone. His own body was never granted a monument. His story was never given a plaque. So he wrote himself into the structure instead. In the end, Josiah's greatest victory may not have been his escape alone, if he indeed lived to see freedom's full horizon. It may have been the way his work endured after those who claimed to own him had turned to dust. The master wanted a house that proved his power. He got that, briefly. What he did not realize was that time had other plans. Now, when people speak of the mansion, they rarely mention Elias Huntley's name. But they talk about the enslaved builder. They talk about the hidden passages. They talk about the mystery of how a man used the very system that bound him to carve a way out. In a world that constantly tries to erase the contributions of the oppressed, this house stands as quiet rebellion. Every secret corridor and concealed opening is a refusal to be limited by the role assigned. Every hidden chamber is an act of defiance. And every whisper shared in its shadow about the man who designed it keeps his memory alive in a way no official record ever intended. If you have stayed with this story to this point, you have walked the length of a life that history tried to reduce to a single line in a ledger. You have seen how intelligence, patience, and unbreakable will can reshape even the strongest walls. Josiah's legacy is not just in stone. It is in the idea that even in the darkest systems, there are minds at work, plotting paths to light. If these stories matter to you, if you believe that the builders behind the facades deserve their name spoken aloud at last, make sure you subscribe and stay with this channel. Share this story with someone who still thinks history only belongs to those who signed the deeds and wore the fine clothes. Here, we bring forward the lives that breathed beneath those clothes, the hands that built the stages where others stood and took all the credit. Every week, we uncover another hidden architect, another buried truth, another reminder that the past is not as simple as the textbooks made it look. Join this growing archive of voices. Help ensure that when these walls and others like them are finally gone, the people who built them are not forgotten with the dust. Because the walls remember.